The courtroom buzzed with the low hum of restless energy, a chaotic symphony of shuffling papers, muted whispers, and the occasional creak of worn wooden benches. Tiana Wallace sat poised on one of those benches, her navy blue skirt suit clinging modestly to her frame, its simplicity a stark contrast to the weight of the moment. Her dark eyes flickered with a quiet intensity, scanning the room as she clutched a binder stuffed to the brim with evidensiphone logs, character references, and testimonies she'd spent sleepless nights compiling. She wasn't a lawyer, and she didn't pretend to be, but every fiber of her being burned with the need to protect her cousin, Mark Freeman, from a system that seemed all too eager to swallow him whole. Across the hall, a cluster of uniformed officers lounged against the beige wall, their coffee cups steaming faintly in the sterile air. Officer T. Parker stood among them, his broad shoulders squared with an arrogance that didn't need words to announce itself. His lips curled into a smirk as he caught sight of Tiana, nudging the man beside him, a shorter, weary officer with a buzz cut and a tired grin. Their laughter spilled out, soft but sharp, like a blade wrapped in velvet. Tiana felt it slice through the air, aimed squarely at her. She'd grown used to this sit-along glances, the unspoken judgments that clung to her like shadows simply because her skin was brown, and her posture unbroken. But today, it stung deeper. Today, she wasn't just Tiana from Southeast D.C. She was a woman on a mission, armed with a truth they couldn't fathom. "You sure you're in the right place, sweetheart?" Parker's voice slithered toward her, dripping with condescension. He leaned forward slightly, his tone a mockery dressed up as concern. "This isn't the line for welfare checks." The words landed like a punch, deliberate and cruel. A jab at her race, her class, her very existence in this space. His colleague chuckled, offering a half-hearted shrug as if to say, "What can you do?" Tiana's breath caught in her chest, a storm of indignation swirling beneath her ribs. Her cheeks flushed hot for a fleeting second, but she swallowed the fire, refusing to let it spill over. "Not yet." "Excuse me," she said, her voice steady as steel, though inside, her heart thundered. She turned slowly, locking eyes with Parker. His smirk widened, amused by her defiance. "Just saying, you might be lost," he replied, his laughter a lazy drawl. "Courtrooms can be complicated for people who don't come here often." The implication hung heavy. "You don't belong here." And for a moment, Tiana felt the weight of every stereotype they'd pinned to her. But she wouldn't crumble, not when Mark's future dangled by a thread. "I know exactly where I'm going, thank you," she said, her tone clipped and firm, then turned on her heel, her footsteps echoing down the hall as she left their snickers behind. She didn't have time for their games. Mark's hearing was minutes away, and she needed to focus. At 19, her cousin was a tangle of brilliance and stubbornness. A kid with a sharp mind who'd somehow landed in the crosshairs of a misdemeanor trespassing charge that reeked of injustice. It had happened late one night outside a shuttered convenience store. Mark swore he'd been waiting for an Uber after a grueling study session at the University of the District of Columbia. His phone records backing him up with a time-stamped ride request. But the store manager, a jittery middle-aged man with a pinched face and a quick temper, had called the cops, claiming Mark was loitering, maybe even scoping the place out to break in. The arresting officers bought the story wholesale, their report painting Mark as a delinquent without a shred of evidence beyond their gut. The security cameras, conveniently offline that night. Tiana's jaw tightened every time she thought about it. She'd seen this script play out too many times. The way bias could twist facts into fiction and ruin lives in the process. Her mind drifted back to the binder in her hands, the lifeline she'd built for Mark. She'd tracked down his professors, who'd gushed about his late-night study habits, and even persuaded a university security guard, a gruff but kind woman named Ms. Laurenio, write a statement confirming Mark had been on campus until nearly midnight. Tiana had pored over every detail, her kitchen table a mess of highlighters and sticky notes, fueled by coffee and a fierce resolve. She wasn't here to play savior or wield her White House credentials like a trump card. No, she wanted Mark's innocence to stand on its own, untainted by influence. But as she sat there, the officer's taunts still ringing in her ears, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the ID tucked into her bag, a quiet symbol of the power she carried. a power they'd never suspect. Tiana's life hadn't been paved with gold. Growing up in southeast D.C., she'd known struggle in a metallic wail of sirens piercing the night, louder and more constant than the birds that greeted the dawn. Some evenings, she'd hunched over her homework under the flickering glow of a single kitchen bulb, her mother Denise's soft lullabies drifting through the thin walls. As she rocked Tiana's younger brother to sleep, Denise was a force of nature, pulling double shifts as a receptionist by day and a grocery cashier by night. Her hands roughened by labor but her spirit unbowed. Money was scarce, but love and grit were abundant, and Tiana soaked it up like sunlight. From her mother, she learned that hardship wasn't a dead end, it was a ladder. If you had the will to climb, and climb she did. Books became her refuge, borrowed from the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Library, their pages whispering tales of pioneers who'd carved paths through impossible odds. She'd sit cross-legged on her bedroom floor, the world outside fading as she lost herself in stories of justice and triumph. Her father, Anthony, had fueled that fire too. She could still see him standing with her on the National Mall when she was 8, the Washington Monument gleaming against a boundless sky. The spring breeze tugged at her braids as he rested a hand on her back, his voice warm and certain. "One day, Tiana, you'll do something important here, right in this city." It wasn't just a wish, it was a promise etched into her soul. That promise carried her through Howard University, where she found her calling in public policy and social justice. She graduated with honors, her name buzzing among professors and classmates as a rare blend of heart and intellect. An internship at the Department of Education led to a role in the White House Office of Public Engagement, a job that felt like the natural unfolding of her father's prophecy. Coordinating youth outreach, linking underserved communities to Resorcessit was work that mattered, and Tiana poured herself into it with a quiet humility that belied her influence. To the world, she was just a slight young woman with neat braids and a modest wardrobe, unassuming as she walked the hallowed halls of power. But beneath that surface lay a reservoir of strength, a legacy of resilience, and a connection to the heart of America's machinery. Now, in the courthouse, that strength simmered as she waited for Mark's case to be called. The officer's words gnawed at her, a reminder of how easily power could be abused, how quickly justice could be warped by prejudice. She thought of Ms. Lorraine, the security guard who'd written that statement, her weathered face creasing into a smile as she told Tiana, "That boy's got a good head on his shoulders. Don't let him tell you otherwise." She thought of the store manager too, his nervous fidgeting when she'd called to ask about the cameras, his excuses piling up like brittle leaves. Every detail fueled her resolve. When Mark's name finally echoed through the courtroom, Tiana rose, her binder a shield against the chaos. The officers watched her, their smirks faltering as she stepped forward with a purpose they couldn't decipher. They didn't know who she was, not yet, but as the hearing unfolded, as the truth clawed its way into the light, they'd learn. And when they did, those who'd mocked her would find themselves scrambling to undo the damage of their own arrogance. Justice, Tiana knew, wasn't just a verdict, it was a reckoning, a lesson carved in the consequences of underestimating those who carried quiet power. For her, for Mark, for every soul dismissed by the powerful, she'd make sure it rang true. As Tiana glanced over her shoulder, the faint echoes of mocking laughter trailed behind her, a sound that prickled her skin like nettles. Yet, instead of faltering, she felt a steel resolve hardening within her chest, rising like a tide against the petty jeers. She had weathered far worse storms, veiled slights dripping with racism, whispered doubts about her intellect, and the constant assumption that she was less than she appeared. Each jab had been a lesson in survival, and this moment was no different. She would push through this too, her spirit unbroken. Deep down, though she wasn't one to flaunt her authority, a quiet satisfaction flickered within her, a secret ember glowing with the knowledge that these officers, smug in their uniforms, would blanch if they ever uncovered her true identity. In the restroom, Tiana leaned over the sink, splashing icy water across her face. The cold stung her cheeks, a sharp contrast to the heat of her simmering anger. She watched the droplets spiral down the drain, imagining her frustration swirling away with them, leaving only clarity in its wake. She was a professional. She reminded herself a woman tasked with carrying the weight of an institution that demanded poise, even when the world pressed down hard. Drying her face with a rough paper towel, she caught her reflection in the mirror. A stubborn crease etched itself between her brows, a silent testament to the tension she couldn't quite shake. She smoothed her expression as best she could, determined to face whatever lay beyond that door with dignity intact. Stepping back into the bustling corridor, Tiana's eyes landed on Alicia Knowles, Mark's defense attorney, standing beside her client. Mark fidgeted nervously, his fingers tugging at his tie as if it were a noose tightening around his neck. His face, usually so composed, betrayed a restless anxiety that made Tiana's heart ache for him. Alicia, a woman in her mid-40s with warm, perceptive eyes and an aura of calm efficiency, raised a hand in greeting. "Tiana," she said, her voice steady and grateful, "thank you so much for being here." At the sight of his cousin, Mark's tense features softened, a faint light breaking through the clouds in his eyes. "You're actually here," he murmured, his tone thick with relief. "I wasn't sure you'd get the time off." Tiana offered him a gentle smile, the kind that carried unspoken promises. "I told you I'd come," she said, her voice a lifeline tossed across his sea of doubt. Turning to Alicia, she added, "I've brought some documents that might help." She handed over a thick binder, her fingers brushing the edge as she gave a quick rundown of its contents: medicalist notes and evidence she'd pieced together late into the night. Alicia's eyebrows lifted, a spark of admiration flashing across her face. "This is incredible." "Tiana," she said, flipping through the pages, "I'll see if we can weave some of these into our exhibits. With luck, they'll help the judge see the real story." Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "But brace yourself if those officers who arrested Mark show up with their usual swagger. This hearing could turn into a battlefield." Battlefield didn't even begin to cover it, Tiana thought, her mind flashing back to the hallway encounter moments ago. She stole a glance around the waiting area, her gaze snagging on that same cluster of officers now lingering closer than before. Their uniforms gleamed under the fluorescent lights, badges catching the glare like tiny shields. Were they all here for separate cases, or was their presence tied to Mark's fate? The air thrummed with unspoken tension, a taut thread linking them all in a dance of mistrust. Mark's soft tug on her sleeve pulled her back. "You okay?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, eyes searching hers for cracks. She nodded, forcing a calm she didn't fully feel. "Just had a little run-in with a few of them," she muttered, brushing it off. "Nothing I can't handle." Alicia glanced at her watch, the faint tick of its hands cutting through the hum of the room. 10 minutes until the bailiff calls us in," she said. "Let's go over the plan one more time." As she outlined their approach, countering any mention of Mark's past minor warnings, highlighting his stellar academic record, and leaning on the phone logs as evidence, Tiana's attention drifted. Her eyes flicked back to the officers, their low murmurs and sidelong glances stoking a fire in her gut. She couldn't shake the feeling that the earlier clash was just a prelude, a ripple before the wave. Suddenly, a voice sliced through the corridor like a blade. "We got a problem here." It belonged to T. Parker, the officer whose name tag Tiana had clocked earlier. His tone was sharp, commanding attention, and it drew curious stares from the scattered bystanders. Tiana and Alicia turned in unison, startled but composed. "No, officer," Alicia replied, her voice a study in professionalism, smooth as polished stone. "Is there something you'd like to address?" Parker's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening as he sized them up. "I don't like the way you're looking over here, that's all," he said, his words clipped and heavy with challenge. "If you've got something to say, spit it out." Mark opened his mouth, a retort poised on his lips, but Tiana's hand found his arm, her touch firm yet soothing. She stepped forward, meeting Parker's glare head-on. "We're just waiting for our hearing, officer," she said, her voice steady as granite. Nothing more, nothing less. The tension coiled tighter, a spring ready to snap. Alicia, sensing the tipping point, intervened with a diplomat's grace. "We're focused on the hearing ahead, sir." "No disrespect intended." Parker let out a scoff, a harsh sound that grated against the air. "Huh, I'll keep that in mind," he muttered, turning sharply on his heel and tossing a low comment to his companions as he stalked off. Tiana felt Mark trembling beneath her hand, his anger a live wire barely contained. "Let it go," she whispered, her breath warm against his ear. "We can't afford a scene now." He nodded, though his jaw clenched tight. A silent storm brewing behind his eyes, Alicia motioned them toward a quieter corner, away from the officer's orbit. As they huddled there, finalizing their strategy, Tiana's mind buzzed with unease. The officer's hostility felt personal, a grudge itching for an outlet. Part of her ached to stride over, to declare with unwavering certainty, "I know my rights, and I understand this system better than you could ever guess." But she swallowed the impulse. Justice, she knew, wasn't won with bravado. It was a chess game, and Alicia was their queen. Tiana's moment, if it came, would unfold on her terms, not theirs. In that hushed corner, her thoughts drifted back to a memory that felt both distant and vivid the day she'd first crossed the threshold of the White House as an employee, not a wide-eyed visitor. She could still hear the hum of the security checkpoint outside the Eisenhower Executive Office building, the beep of the magnetometers as they scanned her bag, the Secret Service agents moving with quiet precision. Every step had felt like a test, as if someone might tap her shoulder and say, "Sorry, there's been a mistake. You don't belong here." But no one did. She'd flashed her crisp new ID badge, and doors swung open, ushering her into a world she'd only dreamed of. That first morning, she'd been led to a modest office overlooking the White House lawn, where a senior aide welcomed her with a firm handshake and a rundown of her duties. The weight of it all, chain of command, the policies she'd helped shape, had pressed down on her, not with dread, but with a profound sense of purpose. She was part of something vast, a machine that touched millions of lives. Back then, she'd been careful not to flaunt her role, especially to friends and family from her old neighborhood. The last thing she wanted was to seem arrogant or detached. She'd grown up alongside people crushed by a system that rarely spared them a glance, their dreams ground down to dust. Now, standing within the heart of power, she grappled with a question that haunted her. How could she use her voice to lift those the world had forgotten? Over time, she'd earned her colleagues' respect with her tireless work ethic and genuine care. She'd spearheaded projects to bring educational resources to underserved kids, partnering with local nonprofits to turn ideas into action. She'd kept her roots close, listening to the raw struggles that hid behind the dry jargon of policy briefs. Her insight into law enforcement came from countless hours facilitating talks between police and community group stunts, fragile dialogues meant to build bridges over chasms of distrust. Progress had been slow, a trickle against a flood of bias, and Tiana wasn't blind to the limits of her efforts. Every step forward was a fragile victory, a pebble tossed toward a horizon she might never reach. Yet here she was, fate twisting her path until she stood on the other side of the courtroom divide. The same officers she might one day work with to reform their ranks now loomed as threats to her cousin's future. The irony burned if they only knew she'd sat across from police chiefs, debating accountability and outreach, her voice steady and sure. But to them, she was just another face in the crowd, a young black woman indistinguishable from the countless others. They ushered through the system's gears. The heavy door to courtroom 4B creaked open, and a bailiff's voice rang out, summoning all parties in Mark Freeman's case. Tiana, Mark, and Alicia gathered their things, binders, notes, a shared resolve, and stepped inside. They settled at the defendant's table, the wood cool beneath Tiana's palms. Across the room, the prosecution's desk buzzed with activity, a stocky assistant district attorney shuffling papers with brisk efficiency. Nearby, 2 officers lingered, T. Parker among them, their postures rigid with purposuitnesses, no doubt, ready to bolster the state's case. The judge entered, a woman in her 50s with a face carved from stern resolve, her robes rustling as she took her place on the bench. "We are on the record," she declared, her voice cutting through the room like a gavel's echo. "Case of District of Columbia versus Mark Freeman, docket number 4293. Her gaze swept the room, pausing briefly on Tiana, who met it with quiet strength. Alicia rose smoothly. "Good morning, Your Honor." Alicia Knowles for the defendant. The district attorney followed, his introduction clipped as he laid out the charge. Mark had been caught loitering, with intent to trespass, The judge inclined her head, her eyes shifting to Alicia. "Ms. Knowles, how does your client plead?" Alicia's response was firm, unshaken. "Not guilty, Your Honor." In that moment, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath, the weight of justice and its consequences hanging heavy in the air. For Tiana, it was more than a hearing, it was a stark reminder of power's double edge, how it could protect or destroy depending on who wielded it. The officers' arrogance, their abuse of authority, only deepened her resolve. Truth and accountability weren't just ideals, they were weapons she'd honed through years of quiet, determined work. Whatever came next, she'd face it head on. Her cousin's fate and the lessons it carried etched into every step she took. In the dimly lit courtroom, tension hung heavy in the air as Alicia straightened her posture, her voice cutting through the murmurs with unwavering determination. "All right," she declared, her tone resolute, as the judge, perched behind the bench, lazily flipped through a stack of notes, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I understand we have some evidentiary motions to address before moving forward," the judge remarked, her voice carrying the weight of authority tempered by a hint of fatigue. Alicia nodded sharply. "Yes, Your Honor. The defense intends to submit the defendant's phone records, which clearly show he was waiting for an Uber at the exact time of the alleged incident. Additionally, we have character statements from his university peers and professors to provide a fuller picture of who he is." Her words were crisp, deliberate, each syllable laced with the conviction of someone who'd spent sleepless nights preparing for this moment. Across the room, the district attorney rose to his feet, his chair scraping faintly against the polished floor. "We will contest the admission of these character statements," he countered, his voice smooth but edged with disdain. "They're irrelevant to the specific events in question. The phone records might hold some weight, but these testimonials, they don't speak to what happened that night." His argument hung there, sharp and dismissive, as if daring anyone to challenge his logic. The judge's eyebrow arched slightly, a flicker of skepticism crossing her face. Though she remained silent for the moment, her gaze shifted toward the uniformed figure stepping forward with a practiced air of confidence. "The officers who responded to the senior they present," she asked, her tone neutral but expectant. T. Parker, broad-shouldered and clad in the crisp navy blue of the Metropolitan Police Department, strode toward the center of the room. "Yes, Your Honor," he replied, his chest puffed out slightly, his voice steady with the assurance of someone accustomed to being believed. The judge gave a curt nod, gesturing toward the witness stand with a flick of her hand. Once sworn in, Parker settled into the chair, his posture rigid, and launched into his version of events with the ease of a storyteller who'd rehearsed his lines. "We got a call from the store manager. Samin was lurking around the shop after hours. When we pulled up, we spotted Mr. Freeman behind the building. He looked jittery, nervous, like he was fiddling with something, maybe trying to jimmy the lock on the back door." His words painted a vivid picture, one dripping with suspicion, and in the gallery, Alicia's pen scratched furiously across her notepad, capturing every detail. Beside her, Tiana sat rigid, her jaw clenched so tightly her teeth ached. Parker's account felt like a twisted caricature of the truth, a tale spun with just enough flair to cast doubt on her cousin Mark. She could feel the heat rising in her chest. Where was the mention of Mark's phone, the Uber app glowing on its screen as he stood there waiting? Where was the simple fact that he'd been stranded, not scheming? Parker pressed on undeterred. I approached him, asked what he was up to. He mumbled something vague about a ride, but he wouldn't show me his phone right away. That hesitation, it made me think he was up to no good, maybe planning to break in. Tiana's nails dug into her palm, leaving crescent-shaped marks in her skin. Mark had told her a different story. Parker hadn't even asked for the phone until after the cuffs were on, after Mark's nerves had frayed and his voice had faltered under the weight of sudden accusation. Alicia rose, her movements sharp and purposeful, her professional demeanor a shield against the rising tide of frustration in the room. "Officer Parker," she began, her voice cool and cutting, "did you find any lockpicking tools on Mark Freeman when you searched him?" Parker's lips twitched, a fleeting crack in his confidence. "No," he admitted, his tone grudging, "but that doesn't mean he wasn't planning something." Alicia didn't miss a beat. "And the store's back entrance said it. You observe any signs of damage?" Any scratches or dents that might suggest an attempted break-in. Parker's mouth tightened, his eyes narrowing slightly. There was no damage, he conceded, but we got there before he had the chance to do anything. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with unspoken questions. Tiana felt the narrative taking shape. Mark, as a would-be thief, stopped just in time by the heroic officers. It was a lie dressed up as justice, and it made her want to scream. Alicia, undaunted, pressed her advantage. What about the store manager's security camera? Did you or your partner review the footage that night to corroborate your suspicions? Parker cleared his throat, shifting slightly in his seat. The manager told us the camera wasn't working. We had no reason to think he was lying. Alicia's gaze flicked toward the judge, her expression pointed. Understood. No further questions, Your Honor. The judge let out a quiet sigh, her fingers tapping lightly against her notes. Prosecution may proceed with any additional witnesses, she said, her tone betraying little of her thoughts. The district attorney called the store manager next, a weary man with a nervous tick in his left eye. He shuffled to the stand, his voice trembling slightly as he recounted his version of events. I saw him hanging around the store after closing. It didn't look right. I got scared and called the cops. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of fear, real or exaggerated. During cross-examination, Alicia produced the phone logs, their time-stamped entries glowing like beacons of truth. These records show Mr. Freeman placed an Uber request just minutes before you spotted him, she said, sliding the documents toward the judge. The evidence was admitted, but the judge's face remained an unreadable mask, her neutrality a wall Tiana couldn't penetrate. Inside, Tiana's anger simmered. Each half-truth, each omission, felt like a brick in a wall designed to bury Mark. As the testimony unfolded, Tiana's eyes drifted to the back of the room. Two more officers lingered there, their arms crossed, their stares cold and unwavering. Were they watching her? Did they sense she was more than just a concerned cousin? Her stomach twisted, a knot of unease tightening with every passing second. She'd seen men like them before, power drunk, cloaked in badges, bending the world to fit their version of right and wrong. Their glares were meant to intimidate, but to Tiana, they were nothing more than pebbles tossed into the vast sea of her determination. She'd faced worse. She would endure. When it was time for the defense, Mark took the stand, his hands trembling as he gripped the edge of the wooden railing. His voice, though shaky at first, grew steady as he spoke. I just left a study group at the library. It was late, and I didn't want to wait on some dark street corner, so I stood by the store. It was lit up. Felt safer. I ordered an Uber and was just waiting. I didn't think I was doing anything wrong. His words carried the quiet desperation of someone caught in a nightmare he couldn't explain. The district attorney pounced, his questions sharp and probing, trying to twist Mark's honesty into something sinister. But Alicia was quick, her objections slicing through the aggression like a blade. Next, she called a campus security guard, a grizzled man with a slow drawl and kind eyes. Yeah, I saw Mark at the library that night, he testified, nodding toward the young man on the stand. He was there late, studying with some other kids. Left around the time he says he did. Alicia followed with character statements from Mark's professorsletters praising his work ethic, his quiet ambition to become a social worker, his spotless record. The district attorney waved them off as irrelevant, but the judge allowed a few, her voice flat as she noted they'd serve as background context. Tiana watched it all in silence, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She ached to speak, to lay bare the truth she knew in her bones, but that wasn't her place, not yet. She caught Alicia's eye once or twice, searching for a sign that she might be called. But the attorney's focus remained elsewhere. In the gallery, Parker and his fellow officers huddled together, their whispers sharp and secretive. Tiana felt their eyes on her again, prickling her skin like static. Were they plotting? Did they recognize her? She forced her face to remain calm, her breathing even, though her pulse thundered in her ears. Then came the twist. Alicia stood, her voice ringing out with quiet confidence. Your Honor, at this time, the defense would like to call Miss Tiana Wallace as a character witness on behalf of the defendant. A ripple of surprise swept through the room, heads turning, whispers rising. Tiana froze for a heartbeat, her breath catching in her throat. She'd thought she'd remain a shadow in this fight, but Alicia had other plans. Steeling herself, she rose, smoothing her skirt with hands that barely trembled. As she approached the stand, the bailiff's gruff voice instructed her to raise her right hand. She swore to tell the truth, her mind racing with the weight of what was to come. Alicia began, her tone warm but precise. "Miss Wallace, how do you know the defendant?" Tiana squared her shoulders, her voice clear and steady despite the storm inside. "I'm Mark Freeman's cousin. We grew up together here in Washington, D.C. He's familiar, more like a little brother to me." Alicia nodded. "Can you speak to his character?" Tiana's gaze softened as she thought of Marcus' late-night study sessions, his dreams of helping kids like the ones they'd grown up with. "Mark's a hard worker, a good person. He's never been the type to break rules or hurt anyone. He's studying to be a social worker, wants to focus on youth programs. It's what drives him, helping people, not harming them." The district attorney stepped forward, his skepticism palpable. "Miss Wallace, you're a relative. That naturally makes you biased. Why should this court trust your word beyond your family ties?" Tiana took a slow breath, glancing at Alicia, who gave the faintest nod. This was a moment she'd kept tucked away. "I work in public engagement for the White House," she said, her voice calm but firm. The words landing like a thunderclap, the courtroom stilled, a collective intake of breath echoing off the walls. The judge's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing with sudden interest. In the gallery, T. Parker's face drained of color, his mouth falling open as if he'd been struck. Recognition flickered in his gaze, perhaps a memory of her face from a briefing, a photo in some government newsletter. The district attorney blinked, thrown off balance. "Public engagement for the White House?" he repeated, his tone wavering. "Could you elaborate?" Tiana offered a small, composed smile, though her heart pounded. "I coordinate outreach programs building bridges between government agencies and underserved communities. That includes working with law enforcement to foster trust, among other things." The air shifted, charged with new energy. The officers in the back exchanged uneasy glances, their bravado faltering. The district attorney rallied, his voice hardening. "Well, Miss Wallace, impressive as that may be, do you have any direct knowledge of Mr. Freeman's arrest?" Tiana met his gaze evenly. "No, I wasn't there. But I know Mark, his habits, his heart. He's not a criminal." As she stepped down, Tiana felt the weight of the room settle on her shoulders. Alicia had played her card well, but the judge's ruling remained a mystery. The evidence-ith phone logs, the testimonies painted a clear picture of innocence. Yet the store manager's frantic 911 call and Parker's embellished tale lingered like shadows. This was more than a trial. It was a lesson in justice, a stark reminder of how power could twist truth into something unrecognizable. For Tiana, it fueled a fury that burned not just for Mark, but for every soul caught in the gears of a system too eager to condemn. In the dimly lit expanse of the university library, where the scent of aged books mingled with the faint hum of fluorescent lights, Tiana had often found herself behind the wheel, chauffeuring her cousin Mark back to his modest apartment after late-night study sessions. She could still picture those drivest way the streetlights cast fleeting shadows. Across his tired face, the quiet gratitude in his nods. She'd seen firsthand his reverence for rules and order, a trait she knew stemmed from their late grandfather, a stoic figure who'd worn the badge of the Metropolitan Police Department for 2 decades. Mark had idolized him, soaking up stories of justice served and integrity upheld, his young eyes wide with admiration. So when Alicia, their sharp-tongued family friend and Mark's attorney, chimed in during the courtroom proceedings, Tiana didn't hesitate to back her up. "You'd find it completely out of character for Mr. Freeman to be skulking behind a store with any ill intent, wouldn't you?" Alicia pressed, her voice steady as she met Tiana's gaze. Tiana straightened in the witness box, her hands clasped tightly to steady the tremor of nerves, and locked eyes with the judge. "Absolutely," she replied, her tone firm, resolute. "It's unimaginable." The judge, a woman with silver-streaked hair and a demeanor carved from years of weighing truth against lies, tapped her pen against the polished wood of her bench. Her thoughtful gaze drifted from Tiana to Mark, who sat at the defense table with his shoulders hunched, then to the prosecutor, whose crisp suit seemed to chafe under the weight of the moment. "Counsel, any further questions for Miss Wallace?" she asked, her voice cutting through the tense air. The district attorney, a man with a perpetually furrowed brow, cleared his throat, the sound rough and uncertain, as though Tiana's words had knocked him off balance. "No, Your Honor," he managed, his fingers fidgeting with the edge of his notes. Alicia echoed him with a crisp, "No more questions, Your Honor," and Tiana stepped down from the stand, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. She could feel the heat of a dozen pairs of eyes boring into her back officers, clustered near the prosecution, their uniforms stiff with indignation, their whispers sharp with disbelief. She didn't dare meet their stares, but as she sank into her seat beside Mark, she stole a glance at Officer Parker. His jaw was clenched tight, his lips moving in a hushed exchange with the colleague beside him. The revelation of her connection to Mark and perhaps her own stature had clearly rattled them. Maybe it was the way they'd sneered at her in the hallway earlier, their dismissive tones dripping with arrogance. Or maybe it was the dawning realization that crossing her might ripple far beyond these courtroom walls. Either way, the air crackled with unspoken consequences. The judge glanced at the clock, its hands ticking toward midday, and declared a brief recess. "We'll reconvene in 15 minutes for closing statements," she announced, her gavel tapping lightly, a soft punctuation to the morning's drama. Tiana let out a slow breath, her chest tight with a whirlwind of emotions: relief, anger, determination. Mark leaned closer, his voice a low murmur tinged with awe. "You work for the White House? I had no idea you were that high up." His eyes searched hers, wide with a mix of pride and worry. Tiana gave his arm a gentle squeeze, her touch a lifeline in the storm. "Let's not make a mountain out of it right now," she said softly. "Just stay calm." "We're holding steady." Alicia, ever the whirlwind of efficiency, gathered her papers in a flurry of motion. "I'll be back in a few. I'm going to corner the DA about a possible settlement," she said, her heels already clicking toward the exit. Left alone in the emptying courtroom, Tiana started to guide Mark toward the hallway when a heavy hand landed on her shoulder. She turned, her pulse quickening, to find Officer Parker looming over her. His smile was a brittle mask, failing to reach the cold glint in his eyes. "So," he said, his voice a low growl meant for her ears alone. "White House, huh?" Mark stiffened, stepping instinctively closer, his fists curling at his sides. But Tiana raised a hand to still him. She met Parker's gaze with measured calm, though her heart thudded against her ribs. "Yes," she replied evenly. "Is there something you need, officer?" His knuckles whitened as he gripped the brim of his hat, the tension in his frame palpable. "You've got some gall, waltzing in here acting all high and mighty," he muttered, his words sharp but hushed, careful not to draw the bailiff's notice. Tiana didn't flinch. "I'm here to stand by my cousin," she said, her voice steady as stone. "I testified to the truth, nothing more." Parker's lip curled, a sneer twisting his features. "People like you think you can twist the rules because you've got strings to pull. We'll see how that holds up when the dust settles." A spark of fury ignited in Tiana's chest, burning through her calm facade. "If by twisting the rules you mean relying on evidence and due process, then yes, that's precisely what we're doing," she shot back, her tone edged with steel. "And as for connections, maybe you should have thought twice about how you treat people before assuming who I am or what I'm capable of." For a fleeting moment, Parker's nostrils flared, and Tiana braced herself, half expecting him to snap. But the bailiff's sudden presence nearby seemed to leash his temper. He muttered something unintelligible, then turned sharply and stalked off, his boots thudding against the floor. Mark stared at her, his expression a tangle of admiration and fear. "You're dancing with flames, T," he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. Tiana exhaled, her hands betraying a faint shake as the adrenaline ebbed. "Sometimes you have to fight fire with fire," she replied, though the weight of Parker's hostility lingered like a shadow. She knew his resentment could cast a long, tangled net, but retreat wasn't an option now. With the stakes laid bare, out in the hallway, Mark paced like a caged animal, his sneakers squeaking against the polished tile, while Tiana leaned against the wall, projecting calm she didn't fully feel. The justice system was a crucible, a place where every word and glance could tip the scales. and she'd walked its tightrope before. In the White House, she'd faced down policy debates where the stakes were measured in billions and human lives, her voice steady even as her stomach knotted. But this was personal, a fight for family, for fairness, and it cut deeper than any briefing room ever could. Alicia approached, her brow creased with a faint frown, her usual confidence tempered by frustration. "The DA's digging in a settlement offer," she said, crossing her arms. "He's still pushing for Mark to take a plea, but I told him no dice. Mark doesn't deserve a diversion program for a crime he didn't commit. We'll take it to closing arguments." Tiana nodded, her jaw tightening with resolve. "Then that's what we'll do. Do we have enough to win?" Alicia sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I think so. The phone logs and testimonies are solid, and there's no hard evidence of burglary, just the store manager's word and the officer's claims, which carry weight. Your testimony definitely tipped the scales in Mark's favor, painting him as the person he really is." Mark slumped onto a nearby bench, his fingers pressing into his temples as if to hold back the headache of it all. "I can't believe they'd try to torch my life over nothing," he muttered, his voice thick with exhaustion. Tiana sat beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder, a quiet anchor. "That's why we're pushing back," she said firmly. Moments later, the bailiff's voice rang out, summoning them back to the courtroom. Tiana, Mark, and Alicia filed in, their resolve a shared pulse between them. But the air shifted when the prosecution called Parker back to the stand, claiming a need to clarify his earlier testimony. Tiana's stomach twisted as he settled into the witness chair, his posture rigid, his energy a coiled spring ready to snap. The district attorney lobbed a series of routine question stimulis, the stance before slipping in a deceptively casual one. "Officer Parker, did the defendant or anyone with him display hostility or unusual behavior that night?" Parker paused, his eyes flicking toward Tiana with a glint of malice. "Well," he drawled, "the defendant was resistant at first, refusing to step away from the store's back door. And I distinctly recall him mentioning a cousin. With government connections, acting like that was supposed to scare us off." Tiana's spine went rigid. Mark had never said facts have staked her life on it. Parker was weaving a lie, a calculated jab to discredit her and drag Mark down with her. The district attorney pounced. "So, you're saying there was an implication of external influence being leveraged?" Parker nodded, his tone oily with insinuation. "Exactly. It's not the first time we've seen that play." Alicia was on her feet in an instant. "Objection, Your Honor. This is speculative and baseless." The judge's eyes narrowed, her pen stilling as she turned to Parker. "Officer, do you have evidence to back this up?" He shrugged, a practiced nonchalance masking his deceit. "Just what my partner and I heard. I stand by it." Tiana's mind race said Parker was tying her White House role into a fabricated threat, banking on his badge to sell the story. The judge frowned. "I'll allow it, but with caution. The defense can cross-examine." Alicia strode to the podium, her fury a tightly reined storm. "Officer Parker, when exactly did Mr. Freeman allegedly mention this cousin?" she asked, her voice cutting like a blade. "Right after we found him behind the store," Parker replied smoothly, "before we cuffed him." Alicia snatched the police report from her folder, flipping through it with deliberate precision. "Your Honor, there's no trace of Mr. Freeman threatening to wield government influence in this report. That's a glaring omission for such a pivotal detail, don't you think?" Parker's face tightened, a crack in his composure. It was a hectic shift. Some things slipped through in the write-up. Alicia zeroed in. "So, you're saying you neglected to document a statement that could suggest intimidation or bribery yet? You recall it perfectly now." He crossed his arms, defiant. "Yeah, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen." Tiana felt the room tilt, the seeds of doubt taking root despite Parker's flimsy lie. If the judge bought into his story, trusting an officer's word over the absence of proof, it could unravel everything. At the defense table, Mark leaned close, his whisper urgent. "I never said that, swear." She gripped his hand under the table. "I know," she murmured, her voice a lifeline. Justice hung in the balance, fragile and flawed, a stark reminder that power misused could twist even the truth, and that fighting it demanded every ounce of courage they could muster. In the hushed stillness of the courtroom, Alicia murmured a quiet reassurance, her hand gently resting on Mark's trembling fingers. "He's lying," she whispered, her voice steady yet laced with an undercurrent of indignation. She turned back to her task with renewed vigor, unleashing a barrage of sharp, incisive questions at Officer Parker during her cross-examination. Each query was a carefully aimed arrow, piercing through the fragile facade of his testimony, exposing cracks of doubt that widened with every response. Parker's credibility, already shaky, crumbled further under her relentless scrutiny. Yet the harm he'd inflicted lingered like a bitter aftertaste. His baseless accusation that Mark had trespassed and threatened law enforcement, with fabricated ties to government influence, had slithered into the room, tainting the air with its rancid presence. Though it lacked substance, the mere utterance of such a claim cast a shadow over the proceedings, a sour stench that refused to dissipate. When Parker finally descended from the witness stand, his shoulders stiff with resentment, Alicia seized the moment. With a calm yet commanding tone, she requested the judge's permission to call an unexpected witness, Dr. Aaron Whitman, one of Mark's university professors, who had just arrived, breathless and slightly disheveled after rushing across town. The judge, her expression unreadable behind her stern demeanor, nodded her approval. Dr. Whitman took the stand, his graying hair catching the dim courtroom light as he adjusted his glasses. He spoke with the measured confidence of a man accustomed to lecturing restless students, recounting how Mark had attended his evening seminar on the night in question. His testimony was precise, detailing the approximate time Mark had left the lecture hall, words that dovetailed seamlessly with the phone records already submitted as evidence. Each sentence bolstered the defense's narrative, a lifeline thrown to Mark amidst the storm of accusations. As Dr. Whitman stepped down, a faint ripple of hope stirred in the room, and the judge signaled her readiness to hear closing arguments, her gavel resting like a silent arbiter of fate. The district attorney, a weary man named Wright with a penchant for dramatic flourishes, rose to his feet. His voice boomed as he painted Mark as a figure shrouded in suspicion, emphasizing how the store manager and Officer Parker had perceived his presence as menacing. He gestured emphatically, as if the mere act of standing outside a well-lit shop constituted a crime. Alicia countered with surgical precision, her rebuttal a masterclass in logic and composure. She walked the court through the evidence step by step, the phone records that traced Mark's movements, Dr. Whitman's corroborating account, the glaring absence of physical proof, and the tangle of inconsistencies in Parker's story. Her words were a shield, deflecting every accusation with reason. Yet beneath her poised exterior, she felt the weight of the moment pressing against her chest. Tiana, seated in the gallery, gripped the edge of her bench until her knuckles whitened. Her heart thundered in her ears, each beat a frantic plea for justice. This was the culmination of weeks of sleepless nights, whispered reassurances, and desperate strategizing with Alicia. If the judge ruled against Mark, the consequences would ripple outward like a stone shattering the surface of a still pond. Probation, a permanent stain on his record. Doors to future opportunities slamming shut. The thought clawed at her, igniting a fierce urge to leap up and denounce Parker's falsehoods. With all the fury she could muster, she imagined herself standing tall, her voice cutting through the silence, stripping away his lies until nothing remained but the truth. But she stayed rooted, her breath shallow, her eyes fixed on the judge. When the judge finally spoke, the air thickened with anticipation, every rustle and whisper in the courtroom falling silent. "I've considered the evidence presented," she began, her voice deliberate, resonating with the gravity of her role. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room, taking in the tense faces before her. The phone logs, the witness statements, and the testimony of Officer Parker have all been weighed. The state bears the burden of proving its case beyond a reasonable doubt. In my judgment, that burden has not been met. A tidal wave of relief crashed over Tiana, Mark, and Alicia, sweeping away the dread that had anchored them. The judge pressed on, her tone unwavering. "Therefore, the charge of trespassing is dismissed." Mark slumped forward, his face buried in his hands, a muffled sob escaping as the tension drained from his body. Tiana exhaled a shaky breath, tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, gratitude flooding her senses. They had won. But the judge wasn't finished. Her expression hardened as she addressed Parker's secondary claim regarding the alleged attempt to intimidate law enforcement by referencing government connections. I find no credible evidence to support that assertion. However, I will caution that if such behavior were to occur, it would be wholly inappropriate and abuse of power that undermines the very system we uphold. Her words hung heavy, a pointed reminder of the delicate balance between authority and accountability. With a firm tap of her gavel, she declared, "This matter is closed." The clerk's voice cut through the lingering echoes, calling the next case, and the room shifted back to its routine hum. For Tiana, Mark, and Alicia, though, the moment felt like a hard-won triumph. Tiana flung her arms around Mark, pulling him into a fierce embrace, while Alicia patted their backs with a quiet smile. "You're free, Mark," she said, her voice soft but resolute. Completely free. They gathered their belongings, scattered papers, a water bottle. Mark's worn jacket and moved toward the exit, their steps lighter, buoyed by a euphoria that bordered on disbelief. Yet as they neared the courtroom doors, Tiana's elation faltered. There, leaning against the wall, stood Officer Parker. His eyes bore into her, dark and smoldering with a fury that seemed to pulse beneath his skin. Mark's acquittal had struck him like a personal affront, and his glare carried the weight of unspoken threats. Tiana braced herself for a cutting remark, but he said nothing, just stared, his silence more menacing than words could have been. She met his gaze briefly, then turned away, refusing to let him steal this victory. Outside, the crisp March air greeted them, a stark contrast to the stifling tension of the courtroom. Alicia bid them farewell with a warm handshake, promising to tie up any loose ends with paperwork. Mark's grin was unstoppable, though shadows of exhaustion lingered in his eyes. "T, you saved me," he said, pulling her into another hug. "I don't know how to thank you." She laughed, a soft, relieved sound ruffling his hair with affection. "That's what family's for. Dummy. Just promise me you'll stop loitering outside random stores." He rolled his eyes, a playful spark returning to his demeanor. It was well lit, not random. "But yeah, I promise." As they prepared to part ways, Tiana's phone buzzed insistently in her pocket. She glanced at the screen, her White House office. Excusing herself, she stepped aside to answer. "Tiana, it's Linda Moreno." Her supervisor's voice crackled through the line. "I know you took today off for personal reasons. Everything okay?" Tiana smiled faintly. "Yes, it's fine now. Court stuff with my cousin." Linda paused, her tone shifting. "Good to hear. Look, we've got a situation with our liaison program with the Metropolitan Police Department. Big miscommunication about next week's community event. Can you come in tomorrow to help sort it out?" Tiana stifled a wry chuckle at the Ironopolis troubles following her even here. "Of course, I'll be there," she replied. Linda thanked her and hung up, leaving Tiana to rejoin Mark. He nudged her playfully. "Trouble at the White House," she shrugged. "Just some event planning mess. I'll handle it." Little did she know, handling it would soon thrust her back into Parker's orbit. The next morning, Tiana strode into the Eisenhower Executive Office building, her security pass flashing as she cleared the checkpoint. Dressed in a tailored blazer and practical flats, she exuded quiet confidence, her mind already racing with ideas to salvage the policing initiative Linda had mentioned. The corridor she walked down was lined with black and white photographs of history, frozen in time. She paused at one from 1963, civil rights leaders seated across from police chiefs, their expressions a mix of wariness and resolve. It struck her how those tense collaborations had shaped progress. Yet the echoes of mistrust still lingered, a reminder of the work still ahead. Linda greeted her in a small conference room, her tone brisk but warm. "Morning, Tiana. Thanks for coming in on short notice. The assistant police chief is delayed, but the rest of the MPD team is here." She gestured to a long table where several officers sat, their postures rigid in their formal attire. As Tiana approached, her stomach plummeted. There, near the end, sat Officer Parker out of uniform, clad in a stiff suit, his presence jarring in this new context. Their eyes locked, and she saw a flicker of shock ripple across his face, swiftly overtaken by a simmering rage he could barely mask. Linda glanced between them, sensing the shift. "Tiana, do you know Officer Parker?" Tiana swallowed, forcing her voice to remain steady. "We've met, yes." In that instant, she realized Parker hadn't fully grasped her identity until now. Her White House connection, mentioned in passing during the trial, had been an abstract annoyance to him. But seeing her here among his superiors, wielding influence in a space he couldn't control, unraveled him. His discomfort was palpable. His arms crossed tightly as the meeting began. Linda outlined the agenda: community outreach events, joint training sessions, efforts to rebuild trust in underserved neighborhoods. Tiana took the lead, her voice clear as she cited data and proposed policies, earning nods from the other officers. Parker, though, remained a statue, silent, brooding, his gaze fixed on her like a predator sizing up prey. Eventually, Linda turned to him. "Officer Parker, you've worked on some of these outreach programs. Any thoughts?" He shifted, his jaw tightening as he flicked his eyes toward Tiana. "I think we need to be careful who we partner with," he said, his voice taut, each word laced with venom. "Some of these community organizers have their own agendas. We don't want to be pawns in someone's political game." Tiana inhaled deeply, meeting his challenge head-on. "That's why we vet every partner thoroughly," she replied evenly. "The aim is mutual trust, not hidden motives." He stared back, unyielding. "Sure," he muttered, "as long as that trust runs both ways." Linda, sensing the undercurrent, steered the conversation elsewhere. But Tiana knew Parker's animosity was a fire still burning. After the meeting, Linda pulled her aside. "You okay? There's some tension with you and Parker." Tiana offered a tight smile. "We've got history. It won't affect the work." Linda raised a skeptical brow. "Just be cautious. We need the MPD on board, and Parker's got sway with some higher-ups." Tiana nodded, appreciating the warning. She understood the stakes. Justice wasn't just about winning a case. It was about navigating the consequences of power misused. As she left that afternoon, Parker was waiting outside, leaning against a squad car, his posture casual, but his eyes sharp. "Tiana," he greeted, his tone dripping with false civility. He straightened, stepping closer. "So, Miss Wallace, guess you think you're a big shot now, telling us how to do our jobs." She narrowed her eyes, refusing to flinch. "I'm doing my job, Parker, just like you should have done yours truthfully." His face darkened, but she turned away, leaving his simmering resentment behind. In that moment, she grasped the deeper lesson. Justice could prevail, but the misuse of authority left scars that festered, and Parker's wounded pride promised a reckoning yet to come. Tiana's heart thundered in her chest, a relentless drumbeat echoing in her ears as Officer Parker loomed closer, his voice slicing through the air like a blade. "Oh, I see what you're trying to pull," he interrupted, his tone dripping with contempt as he took a deliberate step toward her. "I warned you, people who think they can dodge accountability by flashing their titles always end up regretting it. Justice has a way of catching up, no matter how high you climb." His words weren't just a reprimand. They carried the weight of a promise, dark and unyielding. Tiana's pulse surged, her breath catching as she fought to steady herself. "Is that supposed to scare me?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly despite her effort to mask it. Parker's lips curled into a sneer, his eyes glinting with malice. "It's not a threat, it's reality. You might have pulled strings to save your cousin, but let's see how long that little trick holds up." That was the breaking point. Tiana squared her shoulders, summoning every ounce of resolve she had left. "Officer Parker," she said, her tone sharp and deliberate, "if you've got issues with how I do my job, take it up with your chain of command like a professional. Otherwise, we're done here." She turned on her heel, her heart racing as if it might burst free from her ribcage. Behind her, Parker's voice rang out, taunting and bitter. "You won't be so cocky when I'm through with you." For a fleeting moment, her step faltered, a shiver of doubt rippling through her, but she refused to give him the satisfaction of a reply. She quickened her pace toward the metro station, the evening air cool against her flushed skin, though it did little to calm the tremor in her hands. What did he mean by "when I'm through"? Was he plotting something tangible, a calculated strike? Or was it just the bluster of a man bruised by his own ego? The uncertainty gnawed at her, a persistent shadow she couldn't shake. Days slipped by, and Tiana threw herself into her work with a fervor that bordered on desperation. Policy briefings piled up on her desk, their dry pages a welcome distraction as she scribbled notes and prepared for the upcoming outreach event. She met with nonprofit leaders in bustling conference rooms, her voice steady as she coordinated logistics, and she spent late nights crafting speeches for department heads, the glow of her laptop screen illuminating her determined face. Yet beneath her composed exterior, anxiety simmered. Parker's words replayed in her mind like a broken record, each repetition tightening the knot in her stomach. She found herself glancing over her shoulder more often than she'd admit in crowded sidewalks, in quiet hallways, expecting to see his hulking silhouette lurking in the periphery. The city buzzed around her, oblivious to the storm brewing within. One evening, as twilight draped the White House grounds in a soft purple haze, Tiana stepped out into the crisp air, her briefcase clutched tightly against her side. Across the street, a patrol car idled, its engine humming faintly. The figure behind the wheel was obscured by shadows, but the shape broad shoulders, rigid posture felt all too familiar. Parker. Her breath hitched, and she darted in the opposite direction, her heels clicking against the pavement as her heart pounded a frantic rhythm. Was he tailing her, or was this just a cruel trick of her imagination? She tried to reason it away. Maybe he was simply assigned to this beat, a routine patrol overlapping with her routine exit. But the next night, there it was again, the same car, the same menacing silhouette. Doubt curdled into dread. She thought about telling Linda, her supervisor, or even alerting the Secret Service, but hesitated. What if she was wrong? What if she was seeing threats where there were none? She needed proof, something concrete to justify shattering the fragile calm she'd built. The following morning, her phone buzzed incessantly until she answered. Mark's panicked voice spilling through the line. "Tiana, I think someone's watching me," he said, his words tumbling out in a breathless rush. "There's this squad car keeps cruising by my place, slowing down every time I step outside. It's freaking me out." Her grip on the phone tightened until her knuckles ached. "Did you see who was inside?" she pressed, her voice taut. "No, I couldn't make them out," Mark admitted, frustration lacing his tone. "But there were 2 officers up front, and they just stared at me like they wanted me to know they were there. It's happened 3 times this week." Fury ignited in Tiana's chest, hot and fierce. This wasn't just a personal vendetta anymore. It was a deliberate campaign of intimidation, a violation that stretched beyond her to ensnare her family. She wouldn't let it stand. The next day, Tiana strode into Linda's office, closing the door with a soft click that belied the storm raging inside her. "I need your help," she began, her voice steady but urgent as she unraveled the tangled mess. Mark's arrest months ago, the tense courtroom standoff where she'd leveraged her position to secure his release, Parker's simmering resentment at the outreach meeting, and now this possible stalking. A shadow creeping too close to her life. Linda listened, her brow furrowing deeper with every detail, her calm demeanor giving way to a blaze of indignation. "This is outrageous," she said, slamming a hand on her desk. "We're trying to build bridges with law enforcement, and one of their own is harassing a White House staffer. That's unacceptable." Tiana exhaled, relief washing over her like a tide. Linda believed her. "I don't want this blowing up in the press," Tiana added quickly. It had hurt Mark, and the outreach program could take a hit. Linda nodded, her mind already racing. "I'll talk to the deputy assistant. We'll set up a discreet meeting with the police chief. No headlines, just results." Within 24 hours, Tiana sat across from Assistant Police Chief Marion Hall in a wood-paneled office that smelled faintly of polished oak and authority. Linda had orchestrated the meeting with surgical precision, ensuring Parker remained in the dark. As Tiana recounted the Ordelph late-night patrols, the creeping dread, Mark's terror hall's expression hardened, her jaw tightening. "I know Parker," she said, her voice low and clipped. "He's got a clean record on paper, but there've been whispers about his temper. I'll start an internal review, dig into these patrols near your cousin's place." Tiana leaned forward, resting her hands on the table, her gaze unwavering. "I'm not out for blood, Chief Hall. I just want him to stop. Leave us alone." Hall met her eyes, a flicker of respect passing between them. if this is happening like you say. It's a line he shouldn't have crossed. I'll handle it quietly. But if anything escalates, you call me right away." For a while, the tension eased. Mark texted her one evening. His relief palpable. No more creepy drive-bys. Maybe they got the message. Tiana stopped seeing that ominous patrol car near her workplace, and she let herself breathe, a tentative hope blooming in her chest. Perhaps the review had rattled Parker, forced him to back off, but men like him didn't surrender so easily. A week later, Tiana was downtown, running a quick errand to pick up documents from a government office. The streets were quieter than usual, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the pavement. She was cutting through a narrow side street, her mind on the papers tucked under her arm, when she sensed him, Parker, trailing her on foot, his steps deliberate and heavy. Before she could slip away, he closed the distance, his hand clamping around her arm with a force that stole her breath. "You think you can go over my head?" he snarled, his eyes wild with fury, spittle flying as he spoke. Tiana wrenched free, stumbling back, her skin prickling where his grip had been. "Let go of me," she snapped, her voice cutting through the stillness. He jabbed a finger in her face, his rage a living thing. "You ran to my bosses, crying about harassment. Do you know what that does to a cop's career?" Her heart slammed against her ribs, but she stood her ground. "You were harassing me and you still are. Back off or I'll file charges." His face contorted, a mask of venom. "Go ahead. Make your fancy threats. You White House types think you're above everyone else." "I never said that," Tiana shot back, her voice trembling but firm as she fumbled for her phone. "But I can record you right now if you want to keep this up." That stopped him. His eyes darted around, scanning the alley. A handful of pedestrians lingered at the far end, too far to hear but close enough to notice. His voice dropped to a hiss. "Your job doesn't intimidate me. You or your cousin step out of line again, you'll wish you hadn't." Her hand shook as she held up her phone, bluffing with every ounce of courage she had left. "I've got this on video. Leave me alone." He glared, a predator sizing up prey, then stormed off, muttering curses into the wind. Tiana sagged against the wall, adrenaline flooding her system as she dialed Linda. "We've got a problem," she said, her voice quaking. "Parker cornered me, grabbed me." Linda's response was immediate, crackling with urgency. "Get back here now. We're filing a complaint. This ends today." Back at the White House, Linda waited with Chief Hall, who'd rushed over after Tiana's call. Hall paced, fury radiating from her. "That's assault. He's done suspended, effective immediately." Linda nodded. "We need to act fast." "Tiana, will you give a full statement?" Hesitation flickered through her, but she steeled herself. "Yes." Hours later, the complaint was official, and Parker was off the force pending investigation. But his retaliation was swift and vicious. He fed a twisted version of the story to a local news outlet, painting himself as a victim of a power-hungry White House staffer. The headlines exploded. "Officer alleges interference in trespassing case." "Whistleblower cop targeted by political elite." Tiana's name leaked, and suddenly she was at the center of a firestorm. Her quiet life upended by lies. Social media buzzardsome hailed Parker as a hero. Others decried him for attacking a black woman daring to wield influence. The lesson sank deep. Power, when abused, breeds chaos, and justice, though slow, demands vigilance. As security footage from that alley surfaced, capturing Parker's aggression in grainy clarity, the tide began to turn, but Tiana knew the fight was far from over. The grainy security footage flickered across screens nationwide, capturing a moment that would unravel lives and rewrite destinies. Officer Parker's hands clamped around Tiana Wallace's arm, his grip tight with menace as she recoiled, shoving him back with a force born of instinct and outrage. His lips moved in a snarl, animated threats spilling forth. Perhaps not every word was clear, but the intent was unmistakable. A second angle, pulled from a nearby shop's camera, sealed the scene in stark clarity. Parker lunging toward her, his posture radiating aggression. A predator in uniform stalking prey. The public's reaction erupted like wildfire. Overnight, the narrative flipped, and the footage became a relentless loop on every news channel, each replay stripping away the flimsy lie Parker had spun that he'd been the victim. Unjustly provoked. Now, a new story emerged, one of a man who'd wielded his badge like a weapon, only to be exposed by the cold lens of truth. Inside the police department, chaos reigned. Desks buzzed with frantic phone calls as leadership scrambled to justify their protocols. Their voices strained with the weight of a scandal they couldn't outrun. The White House press secretary stepped before microphones, her expression grim as she decried the officer's actions, never uttering Tiana's name, yet leaving no doubt who she meant. Deeply troubling, she called it, her words slicing through the air with a gravity that echoed in living rooms across the country. For Parker, the descent was swift and brutal. By the time Internal Affairs wrapped up their investigation, his career lay in tatters. A freefall fueled by damning evidence, Tiana's unshakable testimony, the unblinking eye of the cameras, and a trail of prior complaints that painted him as a repeat offender, arrogant, unchecked, a bully cloaked in authority. Others stepped forward, their voices trembling but resolute, sharing tales of similar encounters, harassment, intimidation, a pattern of abuse stretching back years. Assistant Chief Hall faced the press, her jaw tight, her tone clipped. "No officer stands above our standards," she declared, the words ringing hollow to some but resolute to others. Effective immediately, Officer Parker is no longer with the Metropolitan Police Department. In the White House break room, Tiana sat surrounded by the hum of a vending machine and the faint chatter of colleagues. The press conference played on a small TV mounted in the corner, and she watched, her chest a storm of conflicting tides, relief crashing against sadness, vindication warring with a simmering anger that Parker had pushed her to this edge. Her phone buzzed incessantly, Mark, her cousin, firing off a string of triumphant emojis, thumbs up, fireworks, a flexed arm, his joy palpable even through the screen. Linda, her soft-spoken co-worker with graying hair and a motherly warmth, rested a hand on Tiana's shoulder, her touch a quiet anchor. "You did it," she murmured, her eyes crinkling with pride. Later, Chief Hall herself appeared, her uniform crisp but her demeanor softened by remorse. She apologized with a sincerity that caught Tiana off guard, promising new training to root out the bias and brutality Parker had embodied. Tiana nodded, her voice steady as she thanked the chief, her hope cautious but real that this mess might spark something better, something lasting. For Parker, the fallout was a merciless tide. Tiana's legal team circled, a civil suit hovering like a storm cloud, though she herself had no hunger for money, just accountability, a shield to protect others from the shadow he'd cast. The media turned him into a parable, a fallen cop who'd twisted his power into a tool for petty vendettas, undone by hubris as much as evidence. Headlines screamed of justice served, of a system forced to reckon with its flaws. A month later, Tiana stood at a podium in the White House briefing room, the air thick with anticipation. It was a youth-focused event, but her presence carried a deeper weight, a defiant signal that she would not be erased or silenced. Her hands gripped the lectern, steadying her nerves as she spoke. She didn't name Parker, she didn't have to. The room thrummed with the unspoken context of her ordeal. Her voice rose, clear and commanding, weaving a tapestry of hard-earned wisdom, the trust between police and communities. Fragile as glass, the vigilance needed to mend it, the reality that most officers serve with honor. Yet the rotten few demanded confrontation. "Change isn't easy," she said, her gaze sweeping the crowd. "But it starts when we refuse to look away." When she stepped back, her pulse hammered in her ears. Mark sat in the front row, his broad shoulders hunched forward, tears streaking his face as he clapped with a ferocity that shook the room. Her mother, a petite woman with a steely spirit, glowed with pride, her smile a beacon across the sea of faces. Linda rose to her feet, joined by colleagues Tiana knew well. Others she'd only passed in the hall united in a standing ovation that rolled over her like a wave. In that moment, she felt the arc of justice bend, just a fraction, toward something truer. Later, in the bustling hallway, reporters swarmed, their questions a barrage she met with grace, but deflected with resolve. Her statement would stand, she needed no more words. Slipping outside, she found solace in the evening's embrace, the White House looming against a twilight sky. A breeze rustled past, carrying the distant hum of traffic, and she closed her eyes, her father's voice echoing from years past. One day, you'll do something important here. She exhaled, gratitude settling over her like a blanket. She'd faced Parker's venom and emerged unbroken. Mark's future was secure, and Parker's reign of intimidation had crumbled. Her father's prophecy had come. Alavesh was carving a path toward justice, one determined step at a time. Tiana's journey had begun in a courthouse hallway, thick with the stench of contempt. Where Parker's threats had first bared their teeth, it stretched into the polished corridors of power, where her courage bloomed, fueled by a conviction that refused to bow. She'd fought not just for Mark, but for every soul his shadow might have touched, dismantling the quiet prejudice that had let him thrive. When his aggression peaked, she'd held fast, letting truth flood the darkness. Parker's downfall was a lesson etched in stone. Power, when twisted, invites a reckoning. For Tiana, the reward was sweeter vindication, yes, but also a stage to amplify the voiceless. Her story rippled outward, a testament that change ignites when one person dares to rise. From the ashes of his arrogance, she built a legacy of resilience, proving that justice isn't a gift bestowed, it's a garden cultivated through grit and grace.